Welcome to the Week 10 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. My name is Warren Sharp of SharpFootballAnalysis.com. Guys, this weather is getting nice and cool and crisp, and fall is obviously here in the air. I cannot believe it's already Week 10. I cannot believe this next Sunday is going to be November 15th, halfway through the month of November. Thanksgiving is going to be here in just a couple weeks right before you know it. And then the season is going to come to a conclusion shortly thereafter, and that's never a great sign when you love football, but more importantly when you love making money on these games, when you're enjoying profiting. And that's kind of the way that we approach the season over here at Sharp Football Analysis. That's the way I'm sure a lot of the guys listening into this podcast approach it. If you're a singular fan of a singular team like the Detroit Lions, you can't wait for the season to come to a conclusion. But for most of us who just love watching games and the competitive nature of the NFL, we don't want the season to end, but particularly not when we're running well, when we're doing good things in terms of making a profit week in and week out. You just want the season to last as long as possible. So I'm not going to think about the fact that the season, we're already into Week 10, double-digit weeks here in the NFL season. We're just going to try to take each week and continue to make good profit on them. So far this season, off of a 4-1 week, I'm hitting 65% in the NFL, including 69% in totals. In college, we're hitting 60% in my college totals, 75% on games 1 unit or larger. So just a very strong season so far. Usually I pick things up a lot in Week 12. We usually have a late season run, and I'm hoping that will continue this year, but we haven't needed to have a late season run to really see a lot of profit so far this year. We've basically been running hot throughout the course of the season. So as the weather gets cooler, as fall rolls in here into the heart of fall, obviously we're looking to keep watching these games, keep trying to look for edges, and I think that there's a lot of interesting edges this upcoming week. But before we get into look at some of those games, definitely want to say I think this last week of football was probably the best week that I've seen, not only this season, but in several years. We had a number of games, according to NFLproject.com, where there was vital importance in terms of playoff seeding, and those games did not let us down whatsoever. Steelers and the Raiders, the Vikings and the Rams, those two games were the most important in terms of playoff seeding, with teams standing to win a lot or lose a lot in terms of their playoff percentage. And both those games ended by 3-point differentials. So a lot of close games in the NFL, multiple overtime games in the 1 o'clock slate, multiple overtime games Sunday night. So just a great day of Sunday football that we saw this past week. If you guys did not catch the podcast that Evan and I recorded on Saturday, the weekend edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast, it means two things. Number one, you missed out on a lot of great information that would have helped you tremendously with your lineups and your sports betting this upcoming week. But number two, it means that you're not subscribing to this podcast. So I highly recommend that you subscribe. If it's the first time you're catching this podcast, subscribe to it on iTunes. It's the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. I'm very thankful for all and large number of people who have been subscribing to this podcast. We've got some great numbers, great stats. A lot of people are sharing this with their friends because of the great information that they're finding here. The uniqueness of this type of information, the way that we're breaking these games down is teaching you guys something. And so we really appreciate all the positive feedback that Evan and I have been getting about this podcast for both the Tuesday edition that we do, which looks back on the games that were, as well as the Saturday edition that we do when Evan Silva comes on and we preview the games that will be. We really sit down for about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes with Evan and break down all these games in great detail. So lots of helpful, useful information to be found. And the other thing that we do is we record that podcast later in the week than most any other podcast out there. So we're able to incorporate late-breaking injury information and news that you guys need to know in terms of setting your rosters or betting on these games. So the numbers and the positioning that we're moving up into the the rankings in iTunes for podcasts and sports and professional sports has just been phenomenal. So really appreciate that. But if you missed that podcast, I want to just go over a couple of key points that we made that I think really played out. The first and foremost was the New Orleans Saints Tennessee Titans game, because I felt very strongly in this game that the key matchup was going to be protection of your quarterback and pass rush of the opposing quarterback. I thought that's what this game was going to come down to. The Tennessee Titans have been under siege from the quarterback position. Their quarterbacks have been taking too many sacks. It injured Marcus Mariota. Zach Mettenberger was getting dropped like a rag doll repeatedly. And I knew that with Mike Mularkey coming in with his offensive line background, that there was a very good chance that he was going to have this unit playing very physically and really focusing on keeping Marcus Mariota off of an injury very clean in the pocket. I felt if that was going to be the case, it was going to be a tremendous boon for this offense, because they had been playing so many games where their offensive line was just letting people through like turnstiles to the quarterback. When you can finally get that protection, it opens so much up. Your offense can become so much more efficient. And so I was anticipating that we might be able to see that against the Saints defense if they got that protection. On the reverse side of things, Drew Brees had looked incredible for several weeks, and that Saints offense had looked incredible, but they had been doing it against literally the number 30, the number 31, and the number 32 defenses in rush efficiency, in terms of teams able to provide pass rush to the opposing quarterback. The opponents that they had just been beating and looking great against could not get pressure on Drew Brees. The Tennessee Titans came into this week ranking third in efficiency for their pass rush unit. And I felt like if they were able to pressure Drew Brees, that would give them the opportunity to get vital in third down, get him off the field, and that type of thing. What ended up happening in this game, Drew Brees was sacked 4 times in this game. Marcus Mariota was not sacked at all. And that ended up being the main difference. Marcus Mariota could be clean in the pocket, put up great statistics in this game on the road. In his first true road game as a professional in a hostile environment in the Dome in New Orleans, walked out of there with a victory. So definitely something that we were all over on the podcast. Another thing that we were all over was the Pittsburgh Steelers, with particular importance on Antonio Brown. Evan Silva mentioned this, that he felt like Antonio Brown was poised to go off in this game. And, a lot of guys were all over Ben Roethlisberger as well. And I wasn't necessarily on Ben Roethlisberger that much. I didn't start him in any of my lineups. I wanted to see him have a great game first and foremost before I put him in the game. But I 100% agreed with Evan Silva on Antonio Brown. The reason being, I was shocked, and we shared this with you guys, when we looked back at the numbers for his first game back off of his knee injury against the Cincinnati Bengals. He passed the ball over twice as often as they handed the ball off. I could not believe how often they were throwing the football in Ben's first game back against a good defense, and I felt like in this game here against the Oakland Raiders, if they're going to be throwing the ball that much against the Bengals in Ben's first game back, they're definitely going to be throwing the ball a lot against the Oakland Raiders. And sure enough, they passed the ball 50 times in this game, and Antonio Brown with a ridiculous 17 catches for 284-yard stat line. I mean, that was absolutely insane. And the third game that I think we were dead right on in terms of projecting, and that was the Jacksonville Jaguars. I got to tell you, and I'll mention this later in the podcast when we're breaking down some of these games in detail, but you can take all your Philadelphia Eagles offense. You can take them. You can take Sam Bradford. You can take DeMarco Murray, and you can have them. For my money, if I'm going to watch an exciting, entertaining game, I want to see Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. I want to see Carr and the Oakland Raiders offense. Hell, if the receivers get healthy, I want to see Jameis Winston in that Tampa Bay Bucs offense, because these are teams that are passing the ball down the field with a lot of accuracy, with a lot of success. They're pushing the envelope offensively. And the Jacksonville Jaguars were in this game all the way through. It was a very close, competitive game. Their 4 turnovers cost them this game completely. But, you look across the board at the stats in this game, and we'll get into in a moment when we talk about some of the headlines, some of the deep passing, some of the early down passing. a great game overall from Blake Bortles against a very difficult New York Jets defense playing in New York. I was very impressed with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think this game, this upcoming weekend where the Jags are right now but catching 6 points in Baltimore, it's going to be a very intriguing game for me as I look forward to the rest of this week and breaking down some of these games. But I thought last week was a great week of football. I thought we nailed a lot of things on the podcast that we recorded on Saturday and got out to you guys. So highly encourage you to check that out. Hope you guys are enjoying the shows and the podcast. You can always, just a reminder, you can always find me on Twitter at Sharp Football. You can find Evan Silva on Twitter at Evan Silva. We give you guys 2 podcasts every single week, so hopefully you guys are taking advantage of information that we're sharing there. With that said, got some great headlines to break down, some interesting situational tendencies and techniques. So let's jump right into the headlines. Story number 1, the Philadelphia Eagles' lack of efficiency or effectiveness in the first half and how they've changed things into the second half. If you look at this team and you look at just the average points per game, let's look at a real macro level here. Average points per game in the first half, only 2 teams are scoring less points in the first half than the Philadelphia Eagles. The San Francisco 49ers and the Houston Texans. The Eagles are scoring just over 8 points per half in the first half. In the second half, however, there's only 2 teams that are scoring more points per half in the second half than the Philadelphia Eagles. They're scoring 15 points per half in the second half. The Patriots are the best in the NFL in terms of scoring in the second half. That's 17 points per half. And the Houston Texans, actually, a team who was scoring less than the Eagles, they're actually scoring slightly more than the Eagles in the second half. That's because that team just is trailing in most games, and they just have Hoyer chucking the ball down the field to against defenses playing prevent. So they're putting up a lot of points late. But obviously, the Houston Texans have a higher score differential first half to second half, but number 2 in the NFL in terms of score differential between halves is the Philadelphia Eagles. So what exactly are they doing here? Let's look first at the game they played against the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday night, where they only scored 7 points in the first half and then exploded in the second half. When you look at this game in the first half, I obviously like to look at early down efficiency. I like to look at how guys, what are they calling on first down? Calling runs or passes? How effective are those play calls? So on first down in the first half against the Cowboys, the Eagles ran 15 play calls. They ran the ball 10 times, so 2/3 of the time they ran the ball. 1/3 of the time they passed the ball. On those 5 pass attempts, Sam Bradford went 3 of 5 for a total of 12 yards, 2.4 yards per attempt at a 65 passer rating. So not very good from Sam Bradford. Gaining 2.4 yards per play on first down passes is not going to set you up for 3rd and shorts. Look at the runs, they weren't much better. They ran 10 times for a total of 32 yards. That's 3.2 yards per play on first down runs. So across the board, whether it was run or pass, they were much more run heavy, and they were not very effective in either case. In the second half, this game was close. It was tied at halftime. It was back and forth in the second half. But instead of running the ball 2/3 of the time on their first down play calls in the second half, they passed the ball. They still ran about 18 play calls. So in the second half and overtime, 18 play calls, very close to 15 that they called in the first half on first down plays. But instead of running the ball so often, they passed the ball 14 of the 18 times. And the routes that they were running and the calls that they were making from the passing game were resulting in much better efficiency. Bradford completed 12 of 14 attempts. That's 86% completions on first down. 189 yards, that's 13.5 yards per attempt. 1 touchdown, no interceptions, a 143 passer rating. So compare what he did there to what he did in the first half, where he was 3 of 5 with a 2.4 yards per attempt. Here he was 12 of 14 for a 13.5 yards per attempt. Passer rating well over double in the second half on these first down play calls. In terms of running the ball, they didn't run it very often. And if you factor in that Sam Bradford had a negative 1 yard rush play, the average drops. But if you just look at the running backs, they were averaging just over 5 yards per carry in the second half on those first down runs, whereas they were averaging 3.2 yards per carry in the first half. So much better play calling. And it wasn't just in this game. Look back at the course of the entire season for this team and what they've done on first down play calls in the first half versus first down play calls in the second half. In the first half, when they're on first down, the Philadelphia Eagles year to date have called about 62 pass plays and 55 run plays. So very close to a level balance there. Slightly more passes, but it's pretty close to 50%. Bradford in the first half is only completing 55% of his passes. He's only averaging 5 yards per attempt with 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, 1 sack, and a 53 passer rating on first down passes in the first half. In the second half, on first down passes, he is averaging 9.3 yards per attempt, which is up from 5.0. He's averaging a 107.6 passer rating, which is up from a 52.6 passer rating. And he's got a 3 touchdown to 2 interception ratio. So, and his completion percentage is significantly higher as well. Up from 55%, he's a 79% passer on first down in the second half. So whatever Chip Kelly is doing in the second half, whether it's adjustments that they're making at halftime that are necessary to make, or they're calling things slightly differently, the efficiency and the effectiveness that he's allowing Sam Bradford in that second half is significantly better. What they need to attempt to do is try to pull that up at least by a quarter so that in the second quarter he's being as efficient and effective. Maybe this Eagles team is a team that starts slow, but this is epic the way that you've been able to look at the Eagles every single week this season and look to them not scoring many points and not giving up many points in the first half, and in the second half betting on the Eagles and betting on the over in the second half line. They're producing much better numbers in the second half and much worse numbers in the first half, and it starts on first downs. And you can see the differences here. The effectiveness and the efficiency from a passing perspective is significantly different. Now, in terms of a running perspective, let's look at the rushing stats here. And it's actually not very different, not very surprising in terms of the efficiency of the ball carries in the first half versus the second half on first down play calls. Ryan Matthews is the better runner on first down, and it's not even close. And that's very consistent between the first half and the second half. DeMarco Murray is struggling tremendously on first down run calls, and that is very consistent between the first half and the second half. So let's look at the big acquisition in DeMarco Murray. In the first half, he has 23 runs on first downs for 2.96 yards per rush. In the second half, he has 35 runs on first down for 2.89 yards per rush. So in both cases, he's just below 3 yards per carry on first downs, and he's getting the ball much more than any other Philadelphia Eagles running back on first down. But let's look at Ryan Matthews for a minute. Ryan Matthews, 18 carries in the first half on first down, 6.8 yards per carry. 6.8. It's well over double what DeMarco Murray is gaining in terms of a per play average. In the second half, Ryan Matthews, 16 carries on first down, 6.4 yards per carry. So once again, very close numbers. They're both above 6 yards per carry, which is obviously a lot better than DeMarco Murray, which is below 3 yards per carry. So there's going to be times, and I will not say anything different because I researched this before the bye week and came to a solid conclusion that DeMarco Murray needs to be the most overpaid short yardage back in the NFL. Put him in there when you got a big lead, that's fine. Let him just bruise the other team. But definitely keep him in there on short yardage plays because he's much better than Ryan Matthews in those situations. But on first down and on second down, you've got to get Ryan Matthews more involved if you're the Philadelphia Eagles offense. Particularly in the first half, when we said their first half yardage is not very good from the run game in the first half overall as a team. Get Ryan Matthews, who's averaging 6.8 yards per carry, more involvement in the first half. Get him more involved. That'll help Sam Bradford out because his passing numbers in the first half are absolutely miserable at 52.6 passer rating and 5 yards per attempt. He comes alive in the second half with whatever Chip Kelly is doing, despite the fact that they're rushing pretty consistently in terms of a per play basis, very consistent between whichever running back is getting the ball. they're very consistent from first half to second half in terms of how effective they are at running the ball. So it's not as if they start running the ball a lot better in the second half and that's helping Sam Bradford. They definitely start doing something different with Sam Bradford after halftime that's allowing him to become much more efficient. They need to start doing that earlier in the game, and they need to get Ryan Matthews more involved on first downs. Story number 2 involves the Carolina Panthers and Ron Rivera and his lack of riverboat Ronning late in games when he's got the lead. This is a coach who decided to come out a couple of years ago and kind of agreed with the nickname of Riverboat Ron, decided that he was going to be more aggressive, more of a gambler style when it came to going for it on fourth down, being aggressive in games when he thought his team needed a spark. But one thing that the last 2 weeks has shown us is that he is not going to riverboat late in games, and it's almost cost his team twice now in games. The only thing that saved them is the fact that they had such a big lead heading into the third and the fourth quarter in these games that allowed them to be able to eat up this production that both Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts as well as Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers produced late in those games. In both cases, they were in situations where their opponent, despite them having massive leads earlier in the games, their opponent was in position to either win or tie the game late with a score. So this very poor idea for the team to get so conservative. And what I mean by that conservative nature is in the last couple of weeks, if you look at what they've been doing in the fourth quarter, in the last 2 weeks, they ran 26 plays in the fourth quarter. 26 total plays. They gained 4 first downs in the fourth quarter. In 2 games, 4 first downs. That's it in the fourth quarter. Cam Newton threw 11 pass attempts. He completed only 54% of those for 75 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, was sacked once, and a 77 rating, 6.8 yards per attempt. So he's not being very accurate on these fourth quarter pass attempts. And from a running perspective, this team is not running the ball very effectively at all. Take out Cam Newton's 1 run for 6 yards per carry. And in the fourth quarter, when they've run the ball the last 2 weeks, this team is averaging 2.5 yards per run attempt. 2.5 yards per run. So, and they're running significantly more than they're passing the football as well. So they're trying to eat up the clock, but they're calling predictable play calls. They're not gaining first downs as a result of that. They're putting themselves in third and long. Cam Newton's not being as accurate on those down and distances in the fourth quarter. This is the exact opposite of what this team was doing last year. If you remember, I studied last year the production of the Carolina Panthers, and most of it from the passing perspective came in the fourth quarter. It came when they were down 10 or more points. It came when they were in garbage time, and Cam Newton was putting up ridiculous stats to Kelvin Benjamin. They had such a large percentage of production from Kelvin Benjamin when they were in what I consider to be garbage time. And they're not in that this season. They've got a good team. They're obviously undefeated. They're not in garbage time. So they're choking to an extent. They're not calling very effective play calls late in games, and at some point that's going to cost them, because at some point they're not going to enter these games with such a large lead, and they're going to get too conservative late in these games, and it's going to cost them some victories. In the regular season, that might not be the worst thing possible, because one of the worst things that you can do sometimes is enter the postseason undefeated. Now, I'm not suggesting Carolina is going to go 8-0 the rest of their schedule here by any stretch of the imagination. I'm shocked that they're 8-0 right now. But the point being is that sometimes getting a loss at this time of year is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But when it comes to the postseason, you have to be able to call plays effectively in the fourth quarter if you have a lead to try to keep the other team on the sidelines and avoid a potential come from behind victory. Some of it has to do with their offense not being effective. Some of it also has to do with the fact that their defense is playing far too conservatively, in my opinion. Now, let's take a step back and look at the course of the entire season. When this team is in the fourth quarter and they're within a one-score game, they have a lead in a one-score game, so they're up by between 1 and 8 points, and it's in the fourth quarter. Cam Newton on the year, 13 of 26, that's 50% completions, 6.6 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and a 68 passer rating. No quarterback in the NFL who has attempted at least 5 passes has a worse passer rating than Cam Newton in these situations. So Cam's rating is the worst of any quarterback in the NFL when he is just trying to not make mistakes, when they're just trying to maintain a lead, not do anything crazy, just win the game. He has not been good in those types of situations. When they're coming from behind, they're playing from behind, he's been tremendous. But when they have the lead and they're just trying to milk it, they're not been doing very well, and they need to figure out a better way to call plays and a better philosophy to utilize. When you look at this team trying to run the football in those situations with a lead of between 1 and 8 points, very poor numbers there as well. So far this season, over the entire season, they have called 34 run plays in the fourth quarter when they've got a one-score lead. And they've gained a total of 94 yards if you back out what Cam Newton has done. So just look at the running backs alone. That's 2.8 yards per carry that this team is gaining when they are in a situation where they've got a one-score lead in the fourth quarter. They've got to find a way to be more effective running the football, and they've got to find a way to be more effective passing the football. Their best weapon in these situations has been by far Cam Newton running it. Cam Newton himself is gaining 6.9 yards per carry when he runs the football on quarterback keepers with a one-score lead in the fourth quarter. So he's been the weapon with his feet at this point in the game. But the running backs have not been very good, and Cam has not been very good passing the football. They're going to need to improve that if they hope to take this solid team into the postseason and win games. All right, story number 3, like we've been covering, is this what I'll call a stat sweep, where we go through some of these key situational statistics and look at how players have performed this past week in games. So let's first start with the early down passing. Obviously, as I've mentioned, early down passing is very important in winning games in the NFL. The best quarterback on early down passes, first and second down passes this past week was Marcus Mariota. He completed 82% of his passes on first and second down for 279 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and 10 yards per attempt. By far the best quarterback in the NFL this past week on early down passing with a 144 passer rating. Extremely impressive, particularly that it came on the road against the New Orleans Saints in his first game back off of injury. Extremely impressed by what he did there. Andy Dalton was the second best quarterback in terms of his passer rating with a 68% completion percentage, 6 yards per attempt, so not very good numbers there, but 3 touchdowns and no interceptions for a 124 passer rating. And Aaron Rodgers, Sam Bradford, Tyrod Taylor all put up good games there from a early down success rate passer rating. When you look at guys who struggled, go no further than the replacement for Colin Kaepernick, which is Blaine Gabbert. Blaine Gabbert on first and second down passes, 50% completion, 7 of 14, 70 total yards, that's 5 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 25 passer rating. It is incomprehensible that a quarterback is going to throw 2 interceptions with no touchdowns and 5 yards per attempt on first and second down. I mean, I can understand if you're in third or fourth down and you end up forcing the ball because your team needs it, but on first and second down passes, you cannot be throwing those types of interceptions. It's just going to kill your team. And we actually saw another quarterback do the same thing this past weekend, which was Peyton Manning, one of the best quarterbacks we have in the NFL. He had a better passer rating. He had more yards per attempt, and he did throw a touchdown, but he also threw 2 interceptions on first and second down, and obviously they lost the game to the Indianapolis Colts as a road favorite. So another quarterback who struggled on first and second down passing was Kirk Cousins. He had a 3.8 yards per attempt on first and second down passes. He threw 28 passes on first or second down, one of the highest numbers in the NFL this past week. Of course, they were losing badly to the New England Patriots, so he was throwing the ball a lot more often, but delivered a 54 passer rating there. And another guy I'll highlight because of the disparity between he and his opponent, and that is Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel on first and second down passes, 10 of 21, that's 47% completions, only 5.1 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, no interceptions, sacked twice and lost 16 yards on those sacks. So, when he is returning a 63 passer rating on first and second down passes, and he's going up against a guy like Andy Dalton, who's gaining a 124 passer rating on first and second downs. You are not going to be able to compete unless you have like a significant advantage in the turnover margin or return touchdowns or something along those lines. You're not going to be able to compete with a disparity like that from one quarterback on one team to the other on the other team on first and second down passing. Let's move to another key metric, which is obviously the ability to gain chunk plays, the deep passing plays. And there were two quarterbacks who delivered perfect ratings this past week on deep pass plays. Not many passes attempted, but perfect ratings. Sam Bradford, actually. Sam Bradford, we talk about him not throwing the ball deep. He actually did in this game go deep 4 times, completed all 4 for 35 yards per attempt, and 1 touchdown, no interception, so that was a perfect passer rating. Tyrod Taylor, he only went deep twice, but he completed both of those, 54 yards per attempt, and 1 touchdown, no interceptions. So those guys, both impressive with their results on very few attempts, but I want to highlight a guy who I mentioned a little bit ago, and that's Blake Bortles. He went deep 16 times in the game versus the Jets and completed 11 of those. That's 69% completions. 286 passing yards when his passes travel 15 plus yards in the air, 17.9 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a 151 passer rating. I was extremely impressed by what Blake Bortles did passing the ball deep on this New York Jets defense, a very difficult defense to pass deep on, with their pass rush, with the coverage and the quality and caliber of the guys in their secondary. So just a very difficult unit to work the ball deep down the field on. Very impressed by what the Jacksonville Jaguars did with Blake Bortles. On the reverse side, guys who are not effective throwing deep at all, one guy that I'll highlight before I'll touch on a couple younger guys, and that's Ben Roethlisberger. He had a much better game last week than he did the week before, but he still was not quite there 100%. He did not have the comfort level in the pocket or the accuracy when he's throwing deep. He attempted 10 passes of 15 plus yards in the air. He only completed 3 of those passes. 1 interception, no touchdowns, and a 37 passer rating on passes 15 plus yards in the air. So, I mean, one of the key things that Steelers were able to do is have Ben move around the pocket slightly, buy his receivers an extra step or two, and then he would hit these guys for big gains. He was not able to do that. It was a lot of stuff that was much shorter that was working better for these guys in the yards after the catch for guys like Antonio Brown. Another couple guys that struggled significantly on deep passing. Blaine Gabbert went 2 of 8 with 2 interceptions on deep passes for 5.5 yards per attempt and a 10.4 passer rating. And Teddy Bridgewater, only 1 of 5 on deep passes, 1 interception, no touchdowns, 5 yards per attempt, and an 8.3 passer rating on those plays. So both those guys struggled supremely. Looking at how guys did in scoring territory when they're trying to score, they're within their opponent's 25-yard line and they're passing the football. Drew Brees was tremendous. He connected on 4 or 5 pass attempts for 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a 139 passer rating. Andy Dalton, also tremendous, connected on 8 of 9 pass attempts, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a 132 passer rating. Blaine Gabbert made up for his lack of effectiveness on deep passing and on early down passing by being very effective when it came to his passes thrown inside of this scoring zone. 3 of 3 for 2 touchdowns and a 134 passer rating, so very effective there. Other guys to note that were very effective on these shorter passes when they were close to their opponent's scoring zone: Andrew Luck, Marcus Mariota, and Phillip Rivers. Guys who struggled. Let's highlight first and foremost Jameis Winston, who was the worst of the bunch in terms of his completion percentage and in terms of his passer rating. He attempted 7 passes and only completed 1 of those passes. That's 14% completions. No touchdowns, no interceptions, and 0.6 yards per attempt inside the opponent's 25-yard line. So inside the Giants' 25-yard line, he was not effective at all passing the football. Some of those were drops. Some of those were guys who should have caught the ball and did not. But he needs to step his game up a little bit there. His receiving core obviously has been depleted with injury, and Mike Evans had hands like bricks this past weekend. But Jameis is obviously going to need to take some of that blame as well and perform better. I have high hopes for this offense once those receivers start to work their way back into the offense. But he's got to play a little bit better in that scoring zone. Two other guys who struggled tremendously in the scoring zone. Sam Bradford went 1 of 4, no touchdowns, no interceptions inside the Dallas Cowboys 25-yard line, only a 39.6 passer rating. And Aaron Rodgers struggled tremendously inside Carolina's red zone, went 5 of 10 for 3.3 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 57.5 passer rating. So those are poor numbers for Aaron Rodgers as well down in the scoring zone. Looking at short yardage running, obviously trying to gain a first down when you got 1 to 3 yards to go and you choose to run the football. Not a whole lot to speak of this week. The San Diego Chargers were a very good team last night. They still lost the game, but they converted all 4 of their short yardage runs into first downs against this porous Chicago Bears defense. Likewise, Chicago ran it 3 times and converted all 3 against the San Diego Chargers' bad run defense. So both teams had a lot of success against poor defenses in converting short yardage runs. The St. Louis Rams did very good converting their short yardage runs against the Minnesota Vikings. Very tough run defense overall, which kept Gurley in check for the most part of that game. But on short yardage runs, they converted all 3 of their rushing attempts into first downs. So that was very strong. Whereas Adrian Peterson and the Minnesota Vikings converted just 50% of their short yardage run attempts against that St. Louis Rams defense. 2 teams that ran the ball a lot in short yardage situations were the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles in their game where they played each one another on Sunday night. Dallas ran it 8 times on short yardage and got first downs 7 of those 8 times. The Eagles ran it 7 times in short yardage and got first down 6 of the 7 times. So neither defense put up much of a fight. A good decision by both head coaches and play callers to go for it using the ground game, keep the ball out of their quarterbacks' hands who have been not as maybe reliable as you would have liked. Just let those running backs behind their offensive line gain some yardage there. You would expect the Cowboys with their good offensive line to be able to do that against the Eagles defense potentially. But it certainly was a little bit of a surprise that the Eagles were so good on these short yardage runs against the Dallas Cowboys front. Looking at teams that were stronger defensively in terms of holding opponents to lack of production, you could say that the New York Giants did a pretty good job against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Giants, Tampa Bay attempted 4 rushes, trying to gain about on average 2 yards for a first down. And the New York Giants held them to an average of 0.75 yards per carry, and they did get first downs only 2 out of those 4 attempts. Strong performance from the New York Giants, short yardage run defense in that regard. Now they're going to go up against the New England Patriots next week. The New England Patriots just held the Washington Redskins. They only attempted 2 short yardage runs, and they only got a first down 1 time. So the New England Patriots run defense and short yardage, not a whole lot of work in this game, but at least they held the Redskins to only 1 out of 2 conversions there. So not too much more to talk about on the short yardage side of things. In terms of the advantageous drives where you're starting off in your opponent's field position to see which teams maybe got the benefit of great field position to help on the scoreboard. The team that gained the most was the New York Jets against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jets started 4 drives inside the Jaguars' field position. On average, they started those drives at the Jaguars' 29-yard line. They scored 2 touchdowns and punted the ball once, and then were able to end the game inside the opponent's field position there at the very end of the game. So that definitely goes to show you that the Jacksonville Jaguars, they lost this game. It was a close 1-score game that they lost, but they gave the Jets some great field position that helped the Jets put up 2 touchdowns. Jacksonville Jaguars started only 1 drive inside the Jets' territory, and they kicked 1 field goal there. So they had to do most of their production by driving the length of the field. The Jets got a lot of their production on the Jags by starting in great field position. So take that into consideration. No other teams with tremendously strong numbers, but I will say this. If you're the Oakland Raiders and you're a team who was on the brink of needing to win this game for great playoff seeding, as well as needing to win this game just for the sake of getting a good road win against a team over here in the very physical AFC North division, the Raiders started 3 drives inside the Pittsburgh Steelers territory. They scored 1 touchdown. However, 2 turnovers on the other 2 drives. 2 turnovers. That's ridiculous. On average, they started on the Steelers' 37-yard line. They lost this game by only 3 points. and yet they had 2 turnovers on drives which began inside the Steelers' territory. We all know Sebastian Janikowski has a great leg and can kick the field goals from a great distance. So, I mean, all you got to do when you're starting on the opponent's 37-yard line is gain a couple of yards, and you can at least get a field goal attempt. They lost by 3 points, yet they turned the ball over twice inside the Steelers' territory on drives that started deep in the Pittsburgh Steelers' territory. That's obviously going to haunt this team for a little while, particularly if they do not make the playoffs, because this game was very important for playoff seeding, and they lost. That's going to be a thing that they're going to look back on at the end of the season if they don't advance to the postseason. All right, guys, that concludes the weekly headline section. So I hope you guys learned something there, maybe from one or all of those headlines that you can utilize moving forward, better understanding of these teams, better understanding of some of the players and what they excel at as you're going to preview how some of these teams might match up against one another in this upcoming weekend of games. And speaking of which, let's move into the rearview mirror segment where we're going to look at every single one of these teams, every single one of these games, and we're going to break down exactly what happened the prior week so we can get a better understanding of the composition of these teams, what they did well, what they did poorly, and how we might utilize some of that information to project some of these matchups here for Week 10. So grab your pens and paper if you don't have them already, and get ready to break down some of these games with us on the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. Let's start with the Thursday night game, a divisional battle between the Browns and the Bengals. Last time we saw Johnny Manziel out on the field, it was Week 2 against the Tennessee Titans. And in that game, he only attempted 15 passes, but completed about half of them, which is not very good, but he was throwing deep down the field, a couple of big connections to Benjamin, and it completed 10.5 yards per pass attempt and a 130 passer rating with 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. A completely different story, though, however, against the Cincinnati Bengals. There are two main storylines in this one. The first and foremost was the fact that Johnny Manziel was not very good in this game whatsoever. Still right around 50% completions, but it was on the bottom side of 50%. He only went 15 to 33. That's 45%. And that was the worst performance of any quarterback this week. But only 4.4 yards per pass attempt, which is pretty terrible. Also the worst of any quarterback this week. 68 passer rating. Now, it's pretty hard when you throw 1 touchdown and no interceptions to record a 68 passer rating, which tells you really how poorly he was throwing the football with a completion percentage and his yards per pass attempt. Those averages were pretty miserable. Overall, therefore, it resulted in the league's worst yards per play for the Cleveland Browns against this Bengals defense. They only gained 4 yards per play, so dead last in the NFL. Interestingly, a very strong day in primetime for Andy Dalton, where he has struggled at times in primetime, but he completed 78% of his passes for 8.1 yards per attempt and a 138 passer rating, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and that was something that we predicted heading into this one, that he was probably going to have a good day against this Cleveland Browns defense. But the interesting part about this game was the simple fact that the Bengals were not pulling away early. They were only up by 4 points at the end of the first quarter, 4 points at halftime, 7 points at the end of the third quarter. It wasn't until they really were able to pour things on into the fourth quarter that they recorded their 31-10 victory. So their offense, perhaps it was a Thursday night issue, but they did get down to the red zone 4 times and converted 3 of them. They just were not in sync early enough in this game, and it kept the game pretty close. It was nothing that the Cleveland Browns offensively were doing to keep the game close. I would say it more fell on the shoulders of what the Bengals were failing to do offensively early, and then they got things straightened out. Speaking of getting things straightened out, the Buffalo Bills really had a great performance, one that they needed to have against the Miami Dolphins. They finally had a nice stable of their players back in there. They had Tyrod Taylor was healthy and playing. He completed a long, deep pass to Sammy Watkins. I believe Sammy Watkins was targeted 8 times in this game and had 8 receptions. So obviously an extremely strong day, strong performance for the passing game of the Buffalo Bills. When you look at some of the stats from the Miami Dolphins and what they did good or what they didn't do well, you can really see across the board that there really wasn't anything surprisingly terrible from the Miami Dolphins. They did have 1 fumble that they lost, but apart from that, take a look at what Ryan Tannehill did. 76% completions, 7.9 yards per attempt, and a 98 passer rating, no touchdowns and no interceptions. That 98 pass rating, all those numbers, the completion percentage, the yards per attempt, and the pass rating, top 10 of all quarterbacks on Sunday. So strong numbers there. They were able to run the ball for 4.6 yards per carry. That was 8th best in the league. And so if their yards per play were actually 6.4 yards per play against this Buffalo Bills defense on the road. So all of those numbers pretty decent for the Miami Dolphins offensively. And when you look at what they did in terms of total first downs, and then they dominated in terms of total first downs. They had 29 first downs. Only one of their team, the New Orleans Saints, had more total first downs in the game this week. And interestingly, they only went to third down 9 times. So they were very strong efficiency at avoiding third downs in this game. But they obviously fell short big time on the scoreboard. They only punted 3 times, however. What did the Buffalo Bills do well? Well, the Buffalo Bills were incredible on third downs. They converted 62% of their third downs. And Tyrod Taylor was malicious with his passing. They only attempted 12 passes, but he completed 11 of them for 12.8 yards per pass attempt and a 147 passer rating. And when they were running the ball, they were gaining chunks and chunks. They averaged 7.4 yards per rush. Both the yards per pass and yards per rush were tops in the NFL. Therefore, no doubt, the yards per play was the best in the NFL at 8.2 yards per play. They ran a total of 51 plays, gained 420 yards. So awesome performance from the Buffalo Bills offensively in this game. And it ultimately led to a 16-point lead. But this is interesting that the Dan Campbell-led Miami Dolphins, they started out their first 2 games under him, starting out very fast in the first quarter. But the last 2 games against the Patriots and now against the Buffalo Bills, they trailed at the end of the first quarter by at least 7 points in each game. That was a hallmark of the Joe Philbin-led Miami Dolphins, starting slow, having to work from behind, not leading, not taking advantage of what they could do in the first quarter. So it'll be very interesting to see what this Miami Dolphins team starts to do now, because it's been evident that Dan Campbell is a very hard-nosed coach. He likes to push the players. He likes to do Oklahoma drills. He likes to challenge them with competition. And I have no problem with challenging guys with competition and being aggressive and being, going after it. But when you're dealing with some veteran players on a team and they're not really sure that you're actually going to be the head coach next year, if things don't start going well for the Miami Dolphins over the next few weeks, they could really lose some of the players and some of the, mentally, some of these guys might check out later in the season, and particularly with the way that Dan Campbell likes to be very aggressive and high-powered, high-motor type guy, high-energy guy at practice, in the locker room. So that'll be an interesting dynamic. Let's look at the New York Giants versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This was a game that I projected was going to be high-scoring, and I was actually slightly surprised for 2 reasons. I was surprised that Eli Manning had such a mediocre to poor day against this Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary, and I was also surprised at how great the Bucs performed, but walked away with hardly anything to show for it on the scoreboard pretty frequently. They got down into the red zone 4 times and only scored 1 touchdown. They kicked 5 field goals. In this game, there was a total of 9 field goals attempted. These teams were just getting down into the red zone. They were getting at the fringes of the red zone, and they were not getting the job done. There was a lot of yardage in this game, particularly if you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They racked up 385 yards, 6.5 yards per play. That was the 5th best yards per play of any team in the league this week. Nobody even punted the ball until the very end of the third quarter. There was only a total of 3 punts in this entire game. The Giants only punted the ball once in this game. So there was a total of 5 turnovers, so there was sloppiness, and there was failed conversions inside the red zone. It was very similar, eerily so, to the game last week against when Tampa Bay played the Atlanta Falcons, where there was an identical 8 trips into the red zone combined in that game and only 3 red zone touchdowns. Same exact stat line here. 8 red zone trips, only 3 red zone touchdowns. But this definitely was a game where there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of potential for points. So the fact that they got that fumble return from the lateral and scored a touchdown. That was complete and utter luck that ended up happening late in the game. But this game was a game, if you're watching the course of the game, that should have gone over without that. It was a game where I believe there was 23 points scored in about 18 minutes into the game. And the total on the game was 47, moved up to 48, moved up to 49. I think I even saw maybe some 50s, or maybe it was just 49 and a half before it got bet down a little bit to 49 again. So with 23 points scored in a quarter and a third, it definitely looked like it was headed that direction, but Tampa Bay kept settling for field goals and then turned the ball over. Great performance from Jameis Winston, though, in this game. His receivers did not help him out in the least. They were dropping balls. Let's talk about this run game. This run game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 136 total rushing yards, 5.9 yards per rush against this New York Giants defense. This New York Giants defense did not sack Jameis Winston not even one time, and that's obviously one of the things that we've been saying about this Giants team. They cannot get pressure on the opposing quarterback. JPP is back now. JPP looked very good, particularly in that second half, at getting close to getting a sack on Jameis Winston. But that's going to be paramount when they go up against the New England Patriots this upcoming weekend. If they cannot get any pressure on that offensive line that is dealing with injuries in New England, then they are going to not be able to get pressure on Tom Brady, and that's going to be a big deal for this defense. They have thrived in their matchups against Tom Brady by being able to get pressure on him with particularly their front four. And so it's imperative that JPP is able to apply some of that pressure. He actually played in 76% of the snaps, defensive snaps in this game. So he played a lot in this game, which was surprising to me how much he played. But he did start to turn it on late. Speaking of what else needs to happen for the New York Giants to be able to do something against the Patriots this next weekend, they're going to need Eli Manning to play a lot better than he did. Eli Manning, with a miserable 65% completions and only 5.3 yards per pass attempt. He had a 74 passer rating. He threw 2 interceptions in this game. So he's got to play a lot better. The defense needs to get pressure on the opposing quarterback, and Jameis Winston needs his wide receivers to step up. This next one's going to be fun to talk about. This is the New Orleans Saints versus the Tennessee Titans, and if of any game this week, I think that there was one game that, having listened to this podcast on Saturday, you were under a certain understanding and impression as to where I thought a game would head. That should be this game, because I said specifically, and I told my clients in my write-up when we played the Tennessee Titans plus 8 points as an underdog in New Orleans, I said this game comes to one metric and one metric alone, and it's how the opposing defense is able to pressure that quarterback on the other side of the field. How well they get past a pass rush. And what we know and what we've seen is that the Tennessee Titans offensive line was a revolving door, allowing defenders to come in and just pressure the quarterback left and right. But they fired their head coach. They brought on board Mike Mularkey, a more offensive line-minded head coach who was going to make it of utmost importance to keep Marcus Mariota, who's coming back from a knee injury that he sustained due to pressure, to keep him upright, to keep him in the pocket, to play physical at that point of attack, at that line of scrimmage, and be able to run the football to help out Marcus Mariota, even with Antonio Andrews in there. That was the goal for them. On the converse side of things, with regard to Drew Brees had recently gone up against literally the number 32, 31, and 30 ranked opposing defenses at providing pass rush against him. So he had a lot of time in the pocket to pass the football. That was not the case this week with the Tennessee Titans, who ranked 3rd in pass rush efficiency. So my handicapping in this game was I felt that it was going to be a massive edge and a massive change for the Tennessee Titans, because they were going to get time in the pocket for Marcus Mariota. He was not going to get sacked left and right. That was going to help the offensive efficiency massively, which then helps their defensive efficiency as well. And I thought they were going to be able to pressure Drew Brees. And that's exactly what ultimately ended up happening in this game and was the determining factor in terms of the Titans going down there and pulling out a great, very exciting win in overtime. Tennessee sacked Drew Brees 4 times, and the Saints did not sack Marcus Mariota even once. Both quarterbacks had great games. You can't say one was superior to the other, but I will say that obviously you would think that Drew Brees should have a good game playing at home in his confines as a veteran. Marcus Mariota, the rookie, playing in his first real road game in New Orleans against a team that was rolling. Both quarterbacks, 28 of 39, 72% completions. Marcus Mariota had 9.5 yards per attempt and a 136 passer rating with 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. So extremely strong day that from his perspective. Extremely strong day from the offensive line in the run game, who ran for 112 yards. The Saints ran for only 61 yards. Both had approximately identical carries in terms of total number of carries. So very strong performance there from the Tennessee Titans run game and offensive line. They actually produced 7.2 yards per play in this game, which is third best of any team this weekend. Both offenses very efficient, and so extremely strong performance there from the Tennessee Titans. Another game that was very exciting and narrowly avoided going to overtime was the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Oakland Raiders. This Oakland Raiders team is an extremely fun team to watch, offensively in particular, with Carr and the connection there with Amari Cooper, throwing Michael Crabtree in there as well. These guys are very fun to watch. I'm really looking forward to seeing this team as they continue to develop. They're 4-4 right now, and I think that there's going to be some interesting angles to look at as the Minnesota Vikings, who are 6-2, are going to come out to Oakland this upcoming weekend. A lot that we're going to be able to touch on in that game for the weekend edition of this podcast. So really looking forward to that game. But rewinding here back to the Steelers versus the Raiders, both run games extremely, extremely productive. Run game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, 195 yards at 6.5 yards per carry. Raiders, 139 yards at 5.6 yards per carry. The interesting factor here, though, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, both Evan Silva and I, we thought Big Ben, potentially after the extra week off from his knee injury, being another week removed, maybe Ben's going to have a good day. I was far less inclined to agree 100% that I thought Ben was back and he would have a good day. But both of us were very strong with Antonio Brown. We both thought that he was going to have a lot of opportunities in this game. And the way that I approached this game is I looked at the game that they just played the prior week when Ben was in his first game back, and despite the Pittsburgh Steelers having a lead for most of that game, they passed the ball over twice as often as they were running the ball. In Ben's first game back from injury, I did not comprehend that against the Bengals defense. I thought they would run the ball a little bit more, try to give Ben a little bit more help in that respect. But given that, I definitely felt that they were going to throw the ball a lot against the Oakland Raiders. That's exactly what they did. Ben had 50 pass attempts, and obviously Antonio Brown had a ridiculous 17 catches for 284 yards. So extremely great call from Evan as well as from myself. I guess pat myself on the back on that one too. But great job by Evan to isolate that matchup and suggest that Antonio Brown would be the guy potentially to target over, even over Big Ben. And he certainly was right on the money on that one. Very, very good game offensively. A lot of trips to the red zone. 10 total trips to the red zone in this game. 6 from the Steelers, 5 from the Raiders. A very strong run game like I just mentioned a moment ago. And overall, top 10 yards per play from both of these teams. So exciting offensive game. Let's go to a exciting defensive game. I guess exciting from the standpoint of this game was very close and ultimately went to overtime, but not much on excitement in terms of the scoreboard. Not a lot of trips into the red zone. There were half the number of trips into the red zone as compared to that Raiders game. And there were a total of 16 punts in this game, 8 from both teams, and that's the Minnesota Vikings and the St. Louis Rams. This was a game that Evan and I also discussed on Saturday and mentioned how we felt this game was going to be very defensive-minded. And I'm mentioning these two games in back-to-back, the Steelers and the Raiders, and this Vikings-Rams game, because NFLProject.com website indicated that these two games would be the two most pivotal games to NFL playoff potential for the future. So for the Pittsburgh Steelers to ultimately get that win over the Raiders, despite Landry Jones coming in there late and taking over for Ben, who's going to miss a few games, a big edge there for the Pittsburgh Steelers for their playoff hopes. And same thing goes true for the Minnesota Vikings, who this game was back and forth. The Rams actually led by 5 points at the half. Neither team was very efficient, and Teddy Bridgewater, obviously, he ended up getting concussed late in that game, and they had to bring on their backup. But even prior to that, not a very strong performance from Teddy Bridgewater, nor did I anticipate it would be. Part of the reason I looked towards the under in this game. The Minnesota Vikings, Teddy Bridgewater, 5.5 yards per pass attempt, a 56 passer rating. Not very good performance there. I felt like they were going to have to lean on Adrian Peterson. I did not think that he was going to be able to get the job done. And indeed, they did run for 145 yards, but that came on 35 carries, so only 4.1 yards per carry. Not terrible numbers, not great numbers either. Todd Gurley and the Rams ran for 4.4 yards per carry, so slightly better from that perspective, slightly better total yards on the ground game, but like we kind of forecasted, Nick Foles is not going to have a great game up in Minnesota. It was a little bit breezy up there as well, so just not a very good day from the quarterbacks, much more of a run day, try to avoid mistakes, punt the ball if you need to, and not a whole lot else to talk about.
All right, the Colts and the Broncos, man, there were so many great games this weekend. To me, this was one of the best weekends I've seen in a long time in terms of great competitive games that were coming down to the wire at the end, very compelling. I anticipated a good weekend of games, but this certainly blew away those expectations. Another strange game here where both quarterbacks, the exact same number of completions and the exact same number of attempts. It's really strange. In the next game we're going to talk about, the quarterbacks were almost identical there as well. Both quarterbacks 21 of 36 for 58% completions. Peyton Manning actually had a slightly better yards per pass attempt, but there's going to be a similar theme between this game and a game I'm going to talk about in about 5 minutes between the Falcons and 49ers, where when you strip away a run game from a road quarterback, even if it's a decent road quarterback, like a Matt Ryan, like a Peyton Manning, and make that quarterback do everything, is very difficult. And that's exactly what we saw here. The Colts shut down the run game. Peyton Manning Peyton Manning and the offensive coordinator only called 14 run plays for the Denver Broncos. They were gaining only 2.5 yards per carry. Peyton threw the ball only 36 times. You're thinking, well, if they're only calling 14 run plays, they should be throwing the ball a lot more. The Indianapolis Colts controlled the clock, 39 minutes time of possession. Peyton Manning threw 2 interceptions in this game. So the Colts were just eating the clock. 40 rushing attempts in the game. Not extremely productive, not extremely efficient, only 3 yards per carry. But they kept the Denver Broncos offense off the field. Now, 3 yards per carry against this great Broncos defense, who knows you might be trying to run the ball, is still a very respectable number from this Indianapolis Colts offense. And this Colts team, they've actually beat Peyton Manning's Broncos 3 out of the last 4 games. There's just some teams that know the right way to coach against certain opponents to maybe exceed expectations with consistency. Not all the time, but they just know the best way to put their team in positions to win games. And that's exactly what we saw here. Nothing absolutely astonishing or tremendous from this Colts offense, but definitely interesting to see the way that Rob Chudzinski called things offensively with very little time to actually work with this starting unit. Got a lot of receivers running open in the secondary against this great Denver Broncos defense who had just gotten rid of shutting down Aaron Rodgers and that Packers passing offense. They come down and just the Colts are running wild against them. And the Indianapolis Colts were off of a very difficult game in Carolina where against another great defense where it looked like they couldn't do anything offensively and Andrew Luck was not playing particularly well, at least early in that game. And later in the game, he turned it on a bit as the Carolina Panthers fell back into more of a prevent mode. But, in this game, very surprised. 17-0 lead by the Indianapolis Colts, jumping off to a very fast lead and then controlled the clock, controlled the time of possession, forced Peyton Manning into some errors, and that was basically how that game finished out. Dallas Cowboys at the Philadelphia Eagles. Awesome way to end the night on a Sunday night with a game like this. Not particularly exciting early, and as we talked earlier on about the way that the Eagles have been starting games and the way that they've been picking things up later in the games, this game was 7-7 at halftime. You're thinking, very low scoring game. You're thinking not a whole lot of excitement. Neither of these quarterbacks are playing all that well. And then boom, an explosion in the second half where the Eagles end up winning 33-27. A great game after halftime, that's for sure. Of course, a lot of people probably on the East Coast were not paying attention, but that's shame on them if they didn't stay up to watch this game. 103 passer rating for Dallas Cowboys, 102 passer rating for the Philadelphia Eagles. So decent day overall from start to finish from both quarterbacks. And like I said, kind of eerie the way these stats are sort of matching up. Both quarterbacks here completed 25 passes. The Philadelphia Eagles had 36 attempts. The Dallas Cowboys had 38 attempts. So very similar there as well, but both had the same number of completions. Both teams gained nearly identical yardage on the ground. 4.9 yards per carry for the Eagles, 4.6 yards per carry for the Dallas Cowboys. This was the 7th and 6th best rankings in terms of yards per carry this week of any team. Overall, though, this was the condition where the Dallas Cowboys controlled the clock, second most time of possession for any game this past weekend. But ultimately, even though they went 3 of 3 inside the red zone, take a Philadelphia Eagles fumble return, sorry, not a fumble return, but a non-offensive touchdown, a return touchdown, and that gave them an extra edge. And of course, they had that big pass play late in the game in overtime to seal the victory there. Definitely some concerns still with both of these teams. Obviously, the Dallas Cowboys have not won a game since Tony Romo went out. My big concern in this game was that when I was analyzing this game, trying to forecast what would happen, I thought that without the left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, with his injury and not being there, that this Dallas Cowboys line and Greg Hardy was going to get much more pressure onto Sam Bradford. And that did not happen whatsoever. They only sacked Sam Bradford one time in this game. So I was definitely surprised by the lack of pressure from that regard. The two teams offensively got things done a bit differently in terms of their efficiency. The Philadelphia Eagles, both teams first of all gained 25 first downs. But the Philadelphia Eagles went to third down only 13 times. The Dallas Cowboys went there 16 times. When forced into third down, the Eagles stunk on third down. They only completed 23% conversions into first down, whereas the Cowboys were very good. They completed 50% of conversions into first down. So Dallas was able to get forced into third downs a little bit more, but was effective there. The Eagles got forced into third down less often, but when got there, they were punting the ball. And so that's where the time of possession discrepancy came about. The Eagles need to keep bypassing third downs, but when they do get stuck in third downs, they got to convert better than 23%. That's a ridiculously low number if they're going to try to expect to win games, particularly on the road. Speaking of a game where a team struggled to win a game on the road that they were expected to win, that's this Atlanta Falcons when they traveled out to the San Francisco 49ers. And certainly the way that this line was set up, it should have given you cause to pause for a moment and reconsider teasing the Atlanta Falcons, because the Falcons were lined as like a 7.5, 7-point favorite on the road in San Francisco. And the Falcons are a team that I think a lot of people are still overrating a little bit. If you've been listening to this podcast, you understand that we don't feel that same way on this side. We do think that they are a little bit overrated. But a lot of people were under the impression that this is a really good team. And even though they jumped out to a great start, they still have holes. They have holes defensively, but clearly I want to say that this wasn't necessarily a failing of the Falcons. It was more so the 49ers coming out and saying this isn't going to happen today with the way that they stacked the box and stopped the Atlanta Falcons run game. They took that away from Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan on the road without a run game is not the same Matt Ryan as Matt Ryan at home when he's gaining a ton of yardage on the ground from his run game. Here, the Atlanta Falcons running backs only 14 total carries in this game for 17 yards. That's 1.2 yards per rush attempt. Horrible numbers there. The Atlanta Falcons therefore threw the ball 45 times compared to those 14 runs. So hugely skewed in terms of the run-pass ratio. But they were pretty miserable overall. 17 first downs, went to third down 21 times, only converted 33% of those, got into San Francisco's red zone 3 times, but only scored 1 touchdown there. So just a very bad overall performance from the Falcons offensively in this game. Now, they did get 2 takeaways from their defense of Blaine Gabbert. Blaine Gabbert, not a particularly good day, not a particularly horrible day, but for those 2 interceptions, he's basically middling with an average in terms of his passer rating, his completion percentage, his yards per pass attempt. But they were able to run the ball at least 38 times for 133 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. Not very good numbers in terms of the yards per carry, but the most important number there is the 38 attempts because it kept Blaine Gabbert from having to throw the ball very much. And you could see those ratios, how they're totally reversed. This is a very close game throughout. Extremely close game. The San Francisco 49ers they trailed after the first quarter, but then led by 4 points at half and by 4 points after the third quarter. So extremely close game throughout this entire thing. The 49ers had led at one point by 11, but for the most part, this game was very close. And the big difference, though, was that the 49ers called 26 pass plays and 38 run plays. The Falcons, 14 run plays and 45 pass plays. So big difference there. Time of possession was a little bit more balanced than you might expect, but the 49ers really were able to keep their quarterback out of harm's way. That was not the case for the Atlanta Falcons in a big, big win for the San Francisco 49ers. Not like they're going to do anything this season, but it hurt the Falcons more than it helped the 49ers, but just for confidence sake in what they were trying to do there. And it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing with Colin Kaepernick from this point onward. Moving on to the Jaguars at the Jets. What a great game this ended up being, and it was a game that it played out similarly to the way that I thought it would, and that was big pass plays from the Jaguars are going to help send this game over the total. I took the over in this game. It was interesting. Here's just a sports betting thing for a moment, but this game opened at 45 at some spots, 44.5 at others, and it was bet down. It was bet down to 42 all the way down there, and the key number, one of the key numbers in totals is 41. And so I sat on this game. I knew I liked the over, but I wanted to try to get the 41, so I waited and waited, hoping that it might move on Sunday morning to 41, but no such luck there. So I ended up playing over 42. Obviously, that one with 51 total points being scored in this game, but for my money right now, I'll trade in my Philadelphia Eagles offensive hat. I'll trade in the hat that I was rooting for with Chip Kelly and Sam Bradford to really come on strong in that offense and DeMarco Murray to be a very productive running back. Give me the Jacksonville Jaguars offense to watch on a Sunday afternoon. Give me the Oakland Raiders offense to watch on a Sunday afternoon with young, promising quarterbacks who are actually going to throw the ball down the field, stand in the pocket, take some hits, get up, and throw the ball deep down the field again. Quarterbacks who are going to be able to hang strong, wide receivers who are going to make big plays for their quarterbacks. That's the type of offense that the Jacksonville Jaguars are playing right now, and that's why their games are so exciting to watch. Blake Bortles, 8.5 yards per pass attempt in this game, 60% completions, and 83 passer rating because he threw 2 interceptions. Kind of like a gunslinger type mentality at times, making some errors in judgment. He is far from a polished quarterback, that's to be sure. But one thing he will do is throw the ball down the field and push it to his very skilled wide receivers, plus Julius Thomas at tight end. They have a great wide receiving core down in Jacksonville. The surprising thing here, though, was the running game. The Jacksonville Jaguars ran the ball only 19 times, whereas they had Bortles throw it 40. But they were running it for 98 total yards. That's 5.2 yards per rush attempt. Big time running numbers from the Jacksonville Jaguars run offense. The Jets defense obviously led up 5.2 yards per attempt, but offensively, they could not run the football at all on Jacksonville. They only ran the ball 28 times for 29 yards. That's just over 1 yard per rush. Pretty terrible numbers there. It's worse than the NFL this past weekend. And that really played into their yards per play being one of the worst of any team this weekend. They actually punted the ball 9 times. The Jaguars only punted the ball 5 times. The Jaguars were much better in terms of yards per rush, yards per pass, first downs, third down conversion percentage. Like across the board, the Jaguars offensively were better than the New York Jets offense. The difference was twofold. Number one, turnovers. You're not going to win a game on the road with 4 turnovers and getting no takeaways from the Jets. That's number one. Number two, you're not going to win a game on the road when you're getting your quarterback sacked 6 times and you're only sacking the other quarterback twice. The Jets sacked Blake Bortles 6 times. So when you're a -4 in sacks and a -4 in turnovers, you should be losing that game likely by well over double digits. You know, like into 14 plus points when you're -4 in turnovers and -4 in sacks. Yet somehow Jacksonville loses this game by only 5 points. And the other thing here was the fact that the Jets even went 3 of 3 inside the red zone. Jaguars 0 for 2. Jaguars 0 for 2 in the red zone, -4 turnovers, -4 sacks, yet still only loses the game by 5 points. They played a hell of a game in New York. Nothing to be ashamed of with that loss except for the turnovers and some of the pass protection, I guess. But offensively, from the skill positions, from what Blake Bortles was able to do in the pocket, very strong performance there. It's unfortunate that they weren't able to walk away with the victory, given how well they played compared to the Jets. Great defensive effort from this Jacksonville Jaguars team. I'm really looking forward to watch this team as they continue moving forward. I think this game against the Baltimore Ravens is going to be very interesting. Ravens off of a bye. Let's see how that offense plays against this Jaguars defense that really shut down completely a Jets run game behind a much better offensive line right now than what the Baltimore Ravens were producing. That should be a very interesting game to watch on next Sunday. Moving on to a game that was very interesting to watch and almost cost the team a victory due to a late comeback, and that's the Panthers versus the Packers. For the second straight week in a row, the Panthers jump out to big leads. I mean, they were up in this game by 20 points at halftime. It wasn't even close. Aaron Rodgers looked terrible once again for the Green Bay Packers, yet the Panthers defense gives up tons of yards in the second half, tons of yards in the fourth quarter, and one of the key issues, one of their key problems that they're struggling with is what types of play calls are they making offensively in that second half to try to maintain possession of the ball. You know, Riverboat Ron Rivera is one of these coaches that have been trying to be much more aggressive offensively. You know, Rivera's been this coach who's been trying to say, yeah, call me Riverboat Ron and I'll go for it on 4th down when the game is close early on or if I think we need a spark. But his play calling offensively when they have a decent lead in the fourth quarter is anything but being a gambler. It's anything but being aggressive. It's so conservative, and then defensively they're playing this very weak prevent defense, and I mean, it's been, I don't want to say it's been by luck that they've won these 2 games late, but they've been giving the other team ample chances to win the game on the final couple of plays of that game. Same thing happened here with the Packers down at the goal line, ready to try to score a touchdown. They would have had to get the 2-point conversion, but I mean, this game could have been headed to overtime because of the way that this Panthers team was playing in the fourth quarter, despite leading at home by 20 at halftime. So I think Rivera needs to get some things under control for this team when they have the lead and they're playing with a lead in the second half, because guess what? There's going to be games that come up here over the next rest of the season and into the postseason, which they're destined to make at this point, where they don't have a 20-point lead at halftime. They might be up by 9 points at halftime, and they're playing a good offense who can come back just like the Colts did and just like the Packers did. They're going to need to coach a little bit differently there in the fourth quarter to be able to walk away with an easier victory. But let's look at some of the stats in this game. You know, obviously Aaron Rodgers came back later in the game and played very well, but overall, over the course of the game, 52% completions, that's 22nd completion rate in the NFL last weekend, 6.9 yards per attempt, a 93 passer rating, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Most all of those touchdowns came late in that game as they were trying a furious comeback. What has happened to Eddie Lacy? Injuries, weight gain, whatever it might be. He is not playing. He's not producing. They had to go back to James Starks in this one. So that's unfortunate with Aaron Rodgers because he doesn't have Jordy Nelson. He's going to need a running back who's going to be able to carry the load. And right now, Eddie Lacy does not seem like he's destined to be that character because he's not filling that necessity. He's not filling that void that they need right now. On the other side of things, awesome performance once again from Cam Newton, just really carrying this team. That offense, he threw 9.9 yards per pass attempt, a 104 passer rating. Very ill-timed interception, however, but 3 touchdowns prior to that. Just a great performance overall from Cam. They were able to control the clock, control the possession. They ran for 427 total yards in this game, 130 yards on the ground, running the ball, 36 carries, 3.6 yards per attempt. With a big lead, they were just trying to get the game over with. That didn't work out well, obviously late, by being inefficient as they were running the ball and then having to punt it back to the Green Bay Packers. But overall, a very exciting game to watch. See this comeback that the Packers tried to mount, but it was too little, too late, obviously. Green Bay needs to figure some more things out offensively. We'll see if that late comeback sparks anything, for next week, because obviously they didn't have any semblance of a comeback against the Denver Broncos. They kind of carried that hangover with them into the start of this game and played the same way offensively. Was it this prevent defense, or was it the fact that they started to get something together? We'll have to see, because this next upcoming week they play the Detroit Lions. They're a huge favorite in that game. Theoretically, they should be able to roll. That's what the point spread is telling us. Will it in fact happen? That remains to be seen. Last but not least, the New England Patriots versus the Washington Redskins. This game was a very close game to the point spread. It was a game that the Patriots just got up early and kind of coasted, but they suffered some big injuries here. Dion Lewis was a big playmaker for this team. Dion Lewis was better than Shane Vereen. Dion Lewis in this offense, the way that he was playing, was far more utilized like a Kevin Falk, like a running back that they were winning Super Bowls with back several years ago, obviously. But that Kevin Falk was so dynamic in all aspects of the game. Even better than Shane Vereen, and that's what Dion Lewis was reminding me of for this New England Patriots offense. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL. He's going to miss the rest of the season. So we know at a running back position, particularly for the Patriots and Bill Belichick, they're usually able to reload that pretty well. They've got their stable workhorse running back still intact there. So I don't necessarily think that it's a disaster, but it might play a role later in the season unless like a Brandon Bolden is going to be able to fill that role effectively, because they've got a stable of guys that they can pull in there, James White possibly, but none of these guys are going to bring exactly what Dion Lewis brought to the table. Patriots, 6 trips into the Redskins red zone, only 3 touchdowns. So there was room for more points there. There was room for more on the scoreboard. They only won the game 27-10. Stayed under the total. They did cover the large 14-point spread, though. Kirk Cousins, 55% completions, only 5.3 yards per attempt, a 68 passer rating, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Not a great day from Kirk Cousins. He did have a few drops. His receivers did not play particularly well. They couldn't run the ball either against the New England Patriots. They only ran for 2.5 yards per rush. So it's never a good thing when you're going on the road and you're trying to help a quarterback like Kirk Cousins win against a high-powered team like the Patriots, and you don't pack your run game, you don't provide any support on the ground at 2.5 yards per rush. There's no way Kirk Cousins is going to be able to get that done himself, and certainly he was unable to do that. All right, guys, we head back to Pittsburgh to discuss injuries once again to another Pro Bowler there, this time for the second time of the year. It's Ben Roethlisberger, who injured his left foot after having injured his left knee and missing games. So now he's got a second injury on that same leg. Those types of things tend to compound themselves, and sometimes actually the foot is more difficult to heal than the knee, where you can easily put a brace on it. So I don't know when exactly he's going to be back. They said it might be a couple of weeks from now, but we'll have to see. Fortunately, they do play the Cleveland Browns with a losing record this week, but I don't really feel safe
for the Pittsburgh Steelers in any game that they're missing Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell in. So especially with Landry Jones playing, this game is not a surefire victory for the Pittsburgh Steelers by any stretch of the imagination. Week 10 against Cleveland Browns. Ryan Fitzpatrick, interesting situation here. He obviously played through the injury that he had to his non-throwing thumb, where he tore 2 ligaments there, but they decided that they're going to undergo surgery next Friday after the next game, which he's going to play on Thursday here, and try to heal up for the following game. And the reason being, it was difficult for him to hand the ball off with his left hand, so they had to adjust. They decided to hand the ball off with his left hand because he was having trouble handing it off with his right hand. And as a result, that probably factored into the issue that the Jets had where they ran 28 times for only 29 yards in that game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So they want to get that fixed for him, and that's going to happen after this game. So one interesting note there with regard to them trying to hand the ball off on a short week may not go quite as smoothly as they would expect it to. So that's an edge for the Buffalo Bills from that perspective in the game on Thursday night. Teddy Bridgewater's dealing with his concussion. We'll have to see if he's able to come back for his game out in Oakland against the Raiders. Dion Lewis, the biggest injury from the running back position this week, tore his ACL. He really was the most dynamic running back that team had. This is why a lot of people thought that definitely he was not going to be the guy getting the majority of the carries. He was going to kind of spell Blunt, and he was going to be more so like a Shane Vereen type character. But the reality was he became like a Kevin Falk character. He was out there on the field with consistency because he was such a matchup nightmare. They could line him up all over the field so quick, such burst. He could beat anybody who tried to cover him out there in space. They are going to be lacking that type of a weapon. I like James White, but he's not as quick or as unique to that offense, not going to be probably utilized exactly the same as Dion Lewis was. So that's a slight downgrade, I would definitely say, for the New England Patriots offense because of his ability to match up. Eddie Lacy, go from one guy in Dion Lewis who was exceeding expectations, a really happy story for the NFL, to a guy in Eddie Lacy who is really, between his weight gain and his dinged up injuries, this guy's been a disaster. If he's been on your season-long fantasy team, I feel bad for you, but he's just been a disaster for this offense, and the lack of run game for Aaron Rodgers to get assistance without Jordy Nelson going deep has been a real problem for the Green Bay Packers. Now he suffered a groin injury. James Starks is the guy taking carries again. It's just a bad situation there. Latavius Murray, he suffered a concussion during the game. He's in the concussion protocol, so we'll have to see if he's healthy and ready to go. LeSean McCoy, he injured his shoulder, a right shoulder injury. They're calling it a mild AC joint sprain, and they're saying he's going to go. He might sit out some practices this week, getting ready for this big game against the Jets for a divisional battle on Thursday night in a couple days. But they say right now that he's probable to go. With regard to wide receivers, not a whole lot of big names. I'm not going to spend a ton of time breaking down anybody but the big names. I will say from the tight end position that Austin Seferian-Jenkins, that offense really needs another guy besides Mike Evans. Mike Evans has shown that he's not quite ready to be the full-time guy. Between the rain and him dropping all those passes, his confidence level isn't all that great. It'd be awesome if the Tampa Bay Bucks can get another weapon out there. Just take a little bit of pressure off Mike Evans to have him make all these catches throughout the course of the game. Obviously, they're missing Louis Murphy. They're missing Vincent Jackson. So they need Austin Seferian-Jenkins to come back. He did practice last week. He practiced fully on Friday, but was a game-time scratch on Sunday. I'd be shocked if he didn't go against Dallas at home this week after hopefully what is a full week of practice, as long as he doesn't suffer any type of setbacks. He's dealing with a rotator cuff strain, so he has been inactive since week 2. So they're hoping he can come back. It would be really important to get him against Dallas Cowboys. Interestingly, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now are favored in this game. They're favored by 1 point over the Dallas Cowboys. So with that said, that wraps up the injuries. I hope you guys enjoyed this Tuesday edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast featuring the Rearview Mirror segment. looking back on all the games that were, breaking everything down. Hope you guys are able to utilize some information from this as you research these games and lineups for the upcoming week. And hopefully you guys are subscribing to this on iTunes and on YouTube so you can check back in with us automatically when we release with Evan Silva the weekend edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast for Week 10. Breaking down all these games, there is a ton of great matchups. I'm already seeing a few games that are really intriguing me with regard to some of the spreads and a couple totals that I'm looking at as well. We're definitely going to be able to break those games down in great level of detail with Evan Silva on Saturday. So hopefully you guys make it part of your weekly routine from this point out, if you aren't already, to sit there, watch a college football game on mute while you're listening to us break down some of these games so that you can then jump back on your laptops or something and start setting up some lineups and start looking at some of these games that you might want to bet on Saturday evening as you got the college football games on TV. So hopefully that becomes part of your routine on Saturdays, and look forward to speaking with you then. Hope you guys have a great week, and we'll talk later.
This is going to be a fun ride. This is going to be a fun ride. Everybody one clap. I'm going to play when I want to play, do what I want to do. I'm going to say what I want to say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. To take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it. I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks. Great cash, homie. I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks. Great cash, homie. Everybody one clap, one clap, one clap, one clap.